Well, hey friends, welcome to your May astrology forecast. The big news is that this month brings a momentous shift as Saturn moves into Aries for the first time and tightens up its conjunction with Neptune. So I want to continue to explore what this means for all of us. And I want to start with a powerful Saturn transit story that carries a message about the kind of growth and resilience that's possible. If you caught last month's forecast, I briefly mentioned Ryan Holiday, the author of the modern Stoic revival book, The Obstacle is the Way. Well, in some interesting synchronicity, he stepped into the spotlight through some recent news just a couple of weeks later. Just as transiting Saturn was making a square to his natal Sun-Uranus opposition, Holiday was scheduled to speak on April 14th at the U.S. Naval Academy on the theme of wisdom. With just 20 minutes left before his talk was set to start, he was informed that his talk was canceled by Academy officials. The reason they gave was that he declined their last-minute request to not mention their recent removal of 381 books from the Academy's library. Holiday had planned to talk about the value of those books, many of which address topics related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Holiday has a Gemini sun and natal Mercury conjunct his Mars out of bounds in Cancer, and we'll hear how he activated a little bit of that feisty Mercury-Mars mix later. Now, many of us would have felt the gut punch of that moment with anger or feeling defeated and maybe just giving up and walking away. A Saturn transit can sometimes correlate with those moments when we think all hope is lost. But in a lot of situations, we're just being asked to dig a little bit deeper and cultivate more inner resolve and determination in those moments. Well, Holiday didn't just give up, he walked his talk and set an example for the rest of us to model in the face of Saturn obstacles. This moment became a living embodiment of the classic Marcus Aurelius quote that inspired his own book title: "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Holiday took this physical concept into real-world action at a pivotal moment. A few days after the talk was canceled, he posted a new YouTube video of his own, sharing his entire planned talk as well as his reaction to the cancellation. He criticized the Academy's censorship and pointed out the importance of being open to discussing challenging subjects in leadership and how engaging with uncomfortable ideas is essential for cultivating wisdom. That obstacle of being blocked from delivering his talk became his way forward. It was an opportunity to stay true to his values and share his prepared speech anyway, while sending a public message to the Naval Academy and anyone else listening. By making his planned speech available online, he could not only reach the students who were prevented from hearing him, but a much wider audience. Well, what a great example that gives us to help combat the sea of negative and too simplistic information being shared on social media about Saturn and Saturn transits. Here we're seeing the real potential for growth, self-actualization, and the development of inner authority. So how's this showing up for you right now? Saturn's working through the last few degrees of Pisces before moving into Aries around May 24th. So if you got placements in the last degrees of those mutable signs or early in the cardinal signs, well, this message is for you. Saturn's offering you an invitation right now to learn a little bit more about your own inner authority and your own strength and resolve in the face of obstacles. When a planet changes signs, its style shifts. Saturn in Aries brings welcome simplicity and directness after being in the sometimes murky energy of Pisces, where clarity just isn't the point. Being in Aries helps Saturn with its boundary-setting purpose. Planets in Aries can have an easier time getting right to the point. As Lynn Bell noted in her recent webinar for Astrology University, Saturn in Aries has to do with learning about right timing. Saturn relates to time management, how we structure our time and our awareness of time's limits, whether that's hours in a day or years in a life. Aries brings impatience that can clash with Saturn's preference for preparation and time management. Aries energy moves forward. This can create trouble for the Saturn in Aries person who jumps into projects without realizing just what they're getting into, potentially making things harder than necessary. Well, this is where Holiday's reminder about reframing obstacles as the way forward becomes valuable for Saturn in general, but especially if you were born with Saturn in Aries or you're experiencing this Saturn in Aries transit. Saturn in Aries can manifest as frustration when externally imposed limits are blocking our path. But remember, anger is information. When frustration rises up, ask yourself, what do I want to build or commit to in this moment? What do I want to direct? Saturn in Aries suggests you might benefit from more direct control over your own experience. If you don't establish your own rules with Saturn in Aries, someone else might fill that vacuum, and before you know it, you're stuck living according to someone else's rules. For the Saturn in Aries person, that's probably not sustainable. We'll hold that in mind as we add in Neptune and get to the Saturn-Neptune conjunction that we're all watching. Saturn spends the last few days of May within 1 degree of Neptune. While it's not exact, that's certainly a conjunction. I'll explore this in more detail in my upcoming webinar at Astrology University as I talk about how to work with this Saturn-Neptune transit in your own chart. Last month I talked about the collective potential to start seeing through some illusions that we've bought into. Boy, am I ready to see some of that happening. Well, this month, let's discuss the potential for sobering up with Saturn-Neptune, and that's maybe literally or figuratively. Let's take Miles Davis as an example. Around 1953, with the transiting Saturn-Neptune conjunction then in Libra, opposite his Venus, his natal Venus, he confronted his heroin addiction. Realizing the negative impact that the addiction was having in his life, he took a trip back to his family home where he'd have a safe container with the intention to go cold turkey. In his autobiography, he writes about his struggle during this time. He said, "It took a long time because I couldn't seem to stop altogether." Then he drew on inspiration from his favorite boxer, Sugar Ray Leonard's discipline. Sugar Ray had a natal Sun-Saturn opposition as part of a grand cross, so Saturn really stood out there. And Davis interrupted his addiction pattern through that inspiration around February of 1954 and started a new chapter in his life. Well, there's a message here for all of us. But for those of you experiencing this year's Saturn-Neptune conjunction directly, consider for yourself, where might you need to sober up? Is there a physical or mental pattern that requires your attention here? Where have you lost the thread? And what do you need to do to pick it back up? Saturn at 0 Aries conjunct Neptune carries the symbolism of a fresh start or turning over a new leaf. Ending or interrupting a cycle of addiction requires heroic effort, but the new life waiting for you can provide the inspiration to persist, especially in those moments when you just don't think it's possible. And here, we're reminded again, the obstacle is the way. Another expression of the current Saturn-Neptune conjunction appears in Ryan Coogler's new film, Sinners. I'm considering a separate video looking at its themes in depth because there are so many, but the film brilliantly explores Saturn-Neptune dynamics through a rich mashup of film genres. It navigates the tension between structure and spirituality, rules and transcendence, the ideal and the real. Billed as a vampire action film, watching it, you could argue that that's just a bait and switch technique to get us to sit still for a bit for some historical fiction that also explores racism in the United States. But it's more than that too. Even the historical fiction in the film takes a loose and fantastical approach to time and space. Because the film isn't just under Saturn's influence, it's not meant to be a history lesson as much as a reflection on its characters' Neptunian longing for freedom, longing for each other, longing for something lost in the past, and longing for an ideal present that they know, in a very Saturnian way, can never be possible in reality, at least in the reality of the film. Saturn and Neptune represent conflicting archetypal fields. Saturn's a planet of rules, reality checks, consequences, suffering, structure, and inner authority like we were talking about earlier. Well, we see the characters in the film navigating all of that. Neptune, by contrast, takes us outside the known parameters of consensual reality. It's the planet of dreams and nightmares, ideals, transcendence of physical and mental structures, of yearning and sometimes delusion. The film Sinners seems to revel in the complex blend of these two archetypal containers weaving together. In his essay, The Ideal and the Real, Richard Tarnas writes that the Saturn-Neptune complex often brings a melancholic romanticism. And boy, is the film full of that. And also a disillusioned idealism, well, that's there too, or a disciplined mysticism. Saturn-Neptune asks us to reconcile the sacred with the fallen and to find the spirit in the world without fleeing it. Well, Sinners does exactly that, as the characters live through a day in which they know their experience can't be sustained. The film draws us into a musically transcendent reflection on structure and spirit, on sin and salvation, and the nature of longing. It invites us to live in the tension that's created through that relationship of Saturn with Neptune, to dance with the devil into ecstatic spiritual abandon, but also to sing the ancestors into a living prayer. This film isn't just a story, story. It's like a sermon or a spell or a reckoning with the past, with ourselves, and with the stories that we tell to survive. In the New York Times, Maya Phillips writes, Sinners is a work that's interested in moral dichotomies. There are monsters and victims, of course, it's a vampire movie, but when the film's characters, objects, and themes are examined through the lens of its political subtext, quite a bit's revealed about how Sinners defines good and evil in this supernatural version of the Jim Crow South. Well, let's shift our focus now to Mars, and we see that it's moved from its extended stay in Cancer now into Leo, and it's no longer out of bounds. Last month we talked about Mars and Leo and that drive to get your own way. So this month we might reflect on the creative potential for Mars and Leo, which can express vibrantly with flair and passion. Mars made a notable opposition to Pluto at the end of April that's lingering still in early May. This evokes any story in which a barely ready hero goes into battle with a giant or a dragon that just seems impossible to face. With Mars squaring the Sun as May kicks off, reflect on the heroic inside yourself. How are you responding to those challenges? Are you breathing deeply and making bold moves, or are you backing down prematurely? If you're looking back at that moment in late April, you might ask, did I let my fear get the best of me, or did I face it with eyes wide open? With Mars and Leo square the Sun in Taurus, there's an invitation to make sure our actions are in direct connection with our heart as we find our way to radiate a bold and simple confidence. A few days in, Mars moves further away from Pluto and into new relationships with Venus and Uranus. On May 11th, Mars makes a parallel to Uranus. With Mars in a fixed sign, you could cultivate determination to stay the course in the face of chaos here. By May 22nd, Venus trines Mars, and that creative spark is ignited. This could be a great day for physical chemistry in all of its forms. Well, backing up to May 10th, we get a fixed T-square between the Moon, Mercury, and Pluto. And that has the feeling of one of those we need to have a talk days.
Okay, this is ridiculous. We need to talk about the elephant in the room.
Get something out in the open and take your time finding the words to express your feelings. Take a break if you need it. Fixity benefits from taking a time out, but also consider pushing through against any impulse that comes up to avoid having the conversation in the first place. On May 19th, we get a fixed T-square between the Moon, Mercury, and Mars. If you instigate a verbal challenge on that day, be clear about your intentions and be ready to not only stand your own ground, but have a plan if the other person isn't budging. Well, Mercury stands out this month for several reasons. First, it's moving away from Neptune, which is going to improve the potential for mental clarity for all of us. And second, it's making several declination aspects with Mars, Uranus, and Pluto, which sets the stage for some mental motion, some movement, some possible breakthroughs, and maybe even some new directions. To make the most of this, keep your communication channels open. While Mercury spends most of the month in Taurus, take time forming your thoughts and figure out what you need to do to invite in some mental grounding. Once Mercury goes into Gemini around May 25th, the gift now comes through letting go of that mental solid ground and opening up. Cultivate curiosity, learn, talk, and share information. This dynamic has a peak on May 29th when Mercury makes a cazimi conjunction with the Sun. Turning now to some days for taking action this month, as you're looking to add a little wind to your sails, there are a few days with a light wind available. Take a look at the Moon in Gemini on May 27th, but wait at least 12 hours after the new moon. As you create your chart for that day, draw on the Moon applying to conjunct Jupiter and sextile Venus for actions that might be related to writing or publishing or communicating. On May 28th and 29th, the waxing moon in Cancer comes with a supportive last aspect and a Venus-Jupiter sextile. There are a few other days with a supportive final aspect of the moon, including May 17th until 9:28 Pacific time, with the moon trine the Sun and Uranus for a personal breakthrough. On May 21st, under the moon in Pisces, and also May 22nd and 23rd with the moon in Aries, and that Venus-Mars trine that we were talking about earlier, which is also in play on the 21st. Well, thanks for tuning into this month's forecast. Until next time, take good care of yourselves and each other. If you found this valuable, well, hit the subscribe button for me and comment about which transit you're most curious about this month. I'd love to hear any stories about that Mars-Pluto opposition last month, or your reflections about the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, especially after Saturn goes into Aries.